PTF here. We've got two sponsors for today's show I want to let you know about, starting with our friends at Santa Anita. Their meet is underway. They're running Friday through Sunday. Great information available on Santa Anita. Any day you're playing the Trip Note Pros, our buddies, you can get their notes, santanita.com. Also, terrific analysis up there. The likes of Jeff Siegel, Michelle Yu, and Frank Scottoni with his matrices. Definitely go and check that out at santaanita.com. You also might want to check out their online Showvivor contest, which is pretty cool. I believe you can still get into that late. Worth checking out on the Santa Anita site as well. And of course, we always plug those golden hour bets, most player-friendly bets around, the pick four, the double, connecting the last two races or the last four races at Golden Gate and Santa Anita. Check it out, santaanita.com. Hello and welcome to the In the Money Players podcast. This is our show for Monday, May 9th. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatal, back with you in the Brooklyn Bunker. Once again, joined by a guest from Planet Texas. Maybe not the one you were expecting. I think he's in the Bahamas or something. He'll be back later in the week. But, you know, some people would say we've upgraded because we are bringing in a man who might be one of the few human beings I can confidently say has been busier than me over the last week to 10 days or so. We're bringing him in now from the mic at Sam Houston, from so many different places. He's Nick Tammaro. What's going on, buddy?
I'm doing well, Pete. Good morning. Good to see you.
Have you recovered?
Yeah. In fact, my wife and I went and saw Coldplay last night. So,
fun.
Yeah. They were in town. Delayed concert for 5 years. They were supposed to play in 2017, and a hurricane stopped them, and then a pandemic. So, yeah, it was a long week, fun week, and ready to get rolling again.
Well, let's talk about this, okay? Because now, normally when I'm out there in the world, just with the, if I'm doing a general media appearance, I'm sticking straight with the, oh, what a story. Anything can happen. Isn't that part of why we play the game? That narrative, which I truly do believe. This is one of those things where I'm holding two thoughts in my head at the same time. But then there's this other part of me that I haven't been able to speak about publicly yet, but that I'm really looking forward to, since we have, our hardcore audience now, that, and again, I do believe all those things are true, and we'll get into that aspect of it. But is there any part of you, Nick, that feels like a result like this after, not just weeks, but months of studying a race, we try to give the best information we can out there, and then something like this happens, and on any level, I mean, how small of a person am I to feel like on some level this result is an insult to the way I've chosen to spend my life?
Oh, totally. I mean, it was like, take the gambling aside. I mean, look, my personal gambling wise, I was alive probably about as well as I had been in a derby in a while. 8 different horses, 5 figures, good size scores, modest investments. My pick 6 had gone well up to that point. Pick 5 had gone well, singles hit, and then for that to happen. And if you had told me ahead of time, Epicenter and Zandon are going to lock up the 3/16 pole, and I was like, all right, that's fine. If nobody else is coming, Simplification was worth twice as much. I saw him on the outside, and then I was watching the race. I walked down to the Jockey Club at Sam Houston, and my mom had come out to watch it, and my wife and daughter walked down with me from the booth. And so one of the guys that I've known there in the Jockey Club for years was like, who's that? And so I saw a horse surging up the inside, and I said, that's the effing 21. And he turns around and he looks at me and he goes, the 21? And I said, yep, that was the 21. And they were like, there was a 21? And I said, yeah, there was a 21. So yeah, it's a very, I don't know if the hollow is not really the right word, because from a gambling perspective, he was an extremely hard horse to bet, right? And we know as horse players that 80-1 was a dramatic underlay. He was actually far longer than that in terms of real ability to win that race. So it's tough to take, and so what it reminds you of, and of course, I mean, I sent off probably a million snarky, angry texts afterwards, and I'm like, I'm never betting the Derby again, blah, blah, blah. And so, because we put this race in hyper focus for so many months, and leading up to it endlessly. So, who do you like in the Derby? Who do you like in the Derby? It's like, ask me who I like in the 5th on Friday at Belmont. Right?
Of course, as we've seen from our numbers on YouTube, from the podcast downloads, from just the people that we deal with in everyday life, this is the race that captures the national attention. And to a degree, it's to probably, technically too much as opposed to all the other good stuff that we have. But you can't. They said this to Clay Sanders from 10 Strike Racing several times back and forth. You can't fight history. You can't.
Right.
You can't. Have a boxing match with a door. Like, there's no changing it. It truly is what it is. The Derby works, right? The Derby's a time when our sport gets out of the little box that we're in the rest of the time. So you can do two things. And for many years on the show, we didn't really amp up the Derby coverage that much. I mean, of course, we did to some degree, but like, now I'm just accepting the fact, like, this is the stuff that works. Give the people what they want. That's the business we're in. Mm-hmm. So, I'm accepting of that. And now I'll spin one for you. You can tell me what you think of. That I think there's a world in which you can argue that it's actually good for the game to have something completely impossible happen. Because for one thing, we see, maybe not like this, but you see all kinds of chaos. Horse racing in so many ways is a laboratory for chaos. And insofar as you can convince people that truly anything can happen in a parimutuel game, it could ultimately redound to our benefit. And what I mean by that reminds me of an interview. I did a book of interviews with professional poker players many moons ago. And one of the pro players in that book told me that rather than get upset when somebody hits a 2-outer on the river against her, she actually tries to flip that script in her mind and turn that around, where she sees it as a good thing, because she knows that money is going to eventually be flowing back to her pocket. If people are going to be playing that way, if they're going to play names, if they're going to say, I'm betting all because anything can happen. Didn't you see the Derby? If people are saying that, ultimately it could help us out at the windows. I'm not sure if that's actually true or not, but I'm trying to go with it because it's a much more positive spin for the day in, day out horse player like you and me. Give me your analysis of that concept.
Oh, I think there's definitely some truth to that without question. I think there's going to be, we saw a reaction in 2010 to what happened in 2009 with Mine That Bird. We had a favorite. Of course, the favorite in 2010, was out a week before the race. But as it ended up, I think the favorite was over 6-1 because nobody wanted to miss out on the long shot. Right. So it's going to be hard for anybody to come in and be a, tremendously huge price. It also, I believe, if you had used the graded earnings system, he would not have been able to get in. So, I don't know if I don't really know if the Jeff Ruby Stakes should be 100-point race, but at the same time, Churchill owns Turfway, so it's not going anywhere.
Right.
So no, yeah, I think there'll be a reaction. There'll be an overreaction in many ways. It was a race run. The other part of it is that we had just not been, and this is more into the race analysis part that we're going to get into, but we had not dealt with a race with this kind of race flow in a long time. So
the pace, we predicted that the pace, this might be the year the pace returned to the Derby, having an old school sprinter like Summer is tomorrow. We had reason to believe, with Seymour having worked for Baffert, this wasn't the foreign horse that was going to come here with theoretical speed and walk out of the gate. This was a horse that was going.
Yeah. And look, Mike Maloney and I talked about it on the podcast that he and I did, talking about the Super. He said, I'm playing for chaos. Basically, I'm playing for a total pace collapse, and it ended up playing out that way.
Yeah, that was a very good, very, very good call. My line about, so I basically said 0 about Rich Strike beforehand. So from our point of view, and I was given some stick about this, and it's hilarious. I'm just going with it. We did do the 3-hour Monster Pod without talking about him, because at that point he was, to be fair, marooned
Right.
on the AEs. And then when it looked, you kept hearing these stories about, Morello's probably coming out, early voting's coming out. I figured we were safe going too deep on the AEs. It honestly never even occurred to me to do the horse. I think I might have taken a cursory glance at the PPs when he was 23rd and saw the form and said, well, even if he gets in, what does it matter? And then unfortunately, by the time the news came down that he was in the field, that was Friday morning. And it didn't even occur to me. I honestly, if somebody had called me and said, let's do 5 minutes on Rich Strike, I would have said, heck yeah, let's do it. We'll pop it up on, I'll find 5 minutes in the hotel. We'll put it up. But it didn't even occur to me to do it. And, I was feeling bad about that. I was feeling bad about all those hours of coverage. Yeah, we did the whole, we did 2 hours for TaylorMade the other night. The horse's name didn't come up. I was feeling bad till I realized that in 6.5 hours of NBC coverage, I'm pretty sure the first time the horse was mentioned was when Larry Collmus said his name inside the 16th pole. And then I felt a little bit better. As analysts, did we mess this up in any way? Did we miss anything here?
No, there was nothing to analyze, really. He was a total afterthought in the race itself. And most people, when they found out that Ethereal Road, I think I was on with Steve Bick on Friday morning, and they announced that Ethereal Road was scratched. And so it was like, oh, who's getting in? And then everybody looked at Rich Strike's PPs and was like, oh, okay. And Kevin Kirstein said, Eric Reed was crying when he heard the news that the horse would get in, and 36 hours later, everybody was crying when they saw the result. So one way or the other, but it was just how it ended up, right? He was a horse that was very difficult to find anything to say about in any kind of positive or productive fashion. But I'll bet one thing for next year, you're going to have somebody on deck for the AEs for the Monster Pod.
No doubt about it. Here is the one thing, and I got this, the text with this started coming in immediately after the race. And it was, shocking to me, honestly, that, because this is a tool that I use all the time, as I assume you do too. According to the Timeform US early and late numbers, on that screen where they rate each horse from a perspective of early and of late, that he actually, and I say this, somehow threw up a higher late pace number by just like a point than even the established really good closers in the race. And I did see Craig Milkowski talking about this on Twitter, and he said that the algorithm threw up, I guess, when he puts stuff together there, it can, when that stuff's all just computer generated, and it will sometimes have like a series of checks and balances, and it threw it up as a possible error. But it is kind of interesting if it wasn't the Kentucky Derby, if it was just a race on a Wednesday, and I was as confident and feeling as clever that this was going to be a pace meltdown, I would pretty much throw in that horse by rote if that Timeform metric had it as the best closer, even if I didn't see it. I sometimes will trust a computer in that regard, in a race where I'm playing it for a certain pace scenario. Now, I didn't do this. I'm not saying I would do it if I had 10 more bites at the apple, but I did think it was interesting and worthy of discussion. How do you think, and you have more experience like figure making too than me, was that just like a mistake that got lucky, which is kind of my inclination? Or, is there even more signal in this Timeform US early and late tool than I've given it credit for in the past?
No, in modern day, we just don't have an abundance of total pace meltdowns. They just don't happen that frequently, and they very rarely happen on a big stage. I guess the Derby is probably a more likely scenario for it than most, given the action-packed nature of the race itself and the size of the field. But that's why, those would come into play if you were handicapping the race and you said to yourself, well, I'm playing this thing for a meltdown. By hook or by crook, I think this thing is just going to completely come apart, and let me try and get a gauge on who's finishing up best. And you still would have then probably used that as a supplemental element to your regular handicapping of the race and looked at his PPs and said, Okay, man, maybe for 50 cents on there, but it's going to take a hell of a lot more than that. One thing I think, as far as the conversation goes with what effect it'll have in the future, you're going to have significantly more players using all in the multi-race bets too. So those are going to become, and the multi-race plays this year were paying so unbelievably well when you consider things. I mean, you had a 4 to 5 favorite sandwiched by 2 7 to 1 shots in the pick four, and I mean, most of the pick fours were paying 4 figures. Yep. So, I think even the 50-cent varieties were up, getting close to 1,000 on a number of the horses. And I couldn't believe what the Epicenter and Zandon pick fives were paying. That started off with Obligatory, who was, 7 to 2, I think, 3 to 1. So yeah, they're paying unbelievably well because the field was so competitive. And so it's going to stay that way in the future, I would imagine, as well. But yeah, I mean, I did see the Timeform US listings there and was like, well, there was one spot for it. And, there's no doubt he had been making up real ground, and maybe was a horse who ultimately, I think pretty clearly was a horse who ultimately just needed a little extra ground.
I mean, the Keen Ice factor too, it just amused me to no end. I mean, Keen Ice, a horse who had, absolutely broken hearts. And I always joke that there's still a chalk outline of me in the paddock bar from where I literally fell to the floor dead after he came and got American Pharoah when we were up for, an obscene score back in the 2015 Travers, and then to have Keen Ice involved in this, it definitely, I have to say, that added to the salt in the wound kind of feeling to me. Years later, generations later, Keen Ice still finding ways to stuff me in a locker.
back from the grave to do it. Not that he was in the grave, but yeah, back. You never can escape it. And I thought they crossed the wire, and I'm like, who is this horse? And I went and looked, and who was his sire? Ugh, But I can imagine it wasn't a particularly happy night in Joe Sharp's house.
Oh yeah, you do have to feel bad for the horse.
I do.
Claimed off of him. For those that don't know that story, horses who've run in claimers have certainly had success in the Derby before, but to have one that's actually claimed, that's some very rough stuff. Other weird little footnotes looking through his PPs. The race at Fairgrounds, you want to look at this race from form terms, where he was 14 lengths to Epicenter. Do you remember who the favorite was in that race? The Gunrunner, I think it was at the Gunrunner Stakes. Yeah, it was the Gunrunner Stakes. Do you remember who the favorite was in that race?
Yeah, it was the Rocket horse, that Rocket Dog.
Rocket Dog for our pals at 10 Strike Racing, who was briefly bet to obscene amounts in the anti-post pool, right? Wasn't that horse like 15 to 1 at some point? I don't know if that was our friends or what, but I did think that was a funny footnote as well.
He was much too short, I can say that. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to Frank Fletcher considering naming a horse Houston Rocket.
That's a good one. You should send that. We know people who know people. We got to send that in there.
I suggested it.
Okay, he hasn't picked up on it yet.
Not yet.
Let's talk about Epicenter, since his name just came up. I mean, I'll just say it simply. How much the best was this horse to be making the move? Not only to make that move in the hot pace, I feel like I'd say if he'd faded to 4th, I think I might be telling you how I thought Epicenter was best. And the fact that he somehow, even though Zandon looked like he was going to go right by, the fact that he turned that horse away, I thought this was, obviously, and we'll talk more about Sonny Leon and the excellent ride on the winner. But I thought what Rosario was able to manage, I figured he was going to have to get caught up in that pace from the inside draw. And I guess you could argue to some degree he did, but he really gave that horse a very good chance and still had enough left in the lane to turn away Zandon. I mean, I was always thinking Epicenter was a very good horse, but this was actually, when we see a result like this, I'm tempted to impugn the crop as a whole, but I think that might be unfair to Epicenter. I think he could be way better than his paper at this point. Am I overrating him?
I don't think so. I think he's really, really good. I think, and I kind of felt that way coming in. But, there's a certain Hall of Fame white-haired trainer who's not spoken of much these days. And there was a lot of discussion 25 years ago, almost 25 years ago, when he lost the Triple Crown with Real Quiet. And he said afterwards, I was not nearly as disappointed as I was when Cavalier lost the Derby in '96. And I think, I don't remember where the interview was taking place. It might have been on TVG, and somebody had said to him why, and he said, because I never knew if I'd get one. With Asmussen, it's got to be starting to get like that third, second place finish. And, if they say in car racing terms, we brought the best car, he brought the best horse into the paddock. Yeah. And it's hard to lose those races. It's hard as a bettor to lose those races. I'm sure as a horseman, it's even harder when you've conditioned your horse properly, and they end up getting, all things considered, a pretty solid trip, but just in a race where the dynamics are so squarely against them, and they run like that, it's got to be very, very hard. And, I thought he was very gracious in defeat, Asmussen was, and said, now we'll hatch a plan to try and win the 3-year-old title, which he's still the favorite for. And so I think they'll do that. But yeah, this was just a remarkably good effort and a very good ride from Joel Rosario. One of the things that all of us love about Joel is that his instincts pace-wise are very good. And he seems to have a great understanding of how things are going in front of him and how he can react to it. And I don't know about you, but when they straightened away, I thought, oh gosh, he's going to draw off and win this thing by 2 or 3 lengths.
Yeah, I agree. No, I thought he was going to blow the race apart before I caught those closers coming. It was a very visually impressive move. And he just, based on the known form and the place in the race that Rosario had gotten him, it looked like it absolutely looked that way. I'm very curious, while we're on Epicenter, what you think is going to happen. I feel like there's a real non-zero chance he might come back in 2 weeks in the Preakness. I know they haven't committed, they haven't ruled it out, but it doesn't seem crazy to me for him to come back. He's going to be so sharp. You win a race like that, and it's shaping up to be an interesting field, the kind of thing that I think between the Herculean effort in the Derby, you come back and win another Triple Crown race. That feels like the way to start your campaign to be 3-year-old of the year. What do you think the odds of that happening are? What would you advise if you were brought in as a racing manager advisor for the team associated with Epicenter?
We'd be eating crab cakes and we'd be headed straight to Baltimore. No doubt about it. I'm a firm believer in what you alluded to, which is that these horses are conditioned so well for one specific race. And I think that you sort of buy yourself enough training time beforehand to let them go another 2 weeks. Yeah. And I would absolutely positively be in the Preakness if I was involved with the connections. And I have a pretty strong feeling he's going to end up there. I think Asmussen knows a little bit about winning the Preakness. He's done it twice. And he did it once with a horse that, of course, he just took over the training for and brought back in 15 days. And Curlin was probably a fair comparison to Epicenter from the standpoint of what he had done that year. I mean, Epicenter's actually got some bottom to him. I mean, he ran in every race on the Fairgrounds Trail, plus the Gun Runner, which was right before the 1st of January. So he has some foundation. If they're trying to do what Asmussen said, which is win the Eclipse, you've got to win one of the next 2 classics. So, do you want to take on a bevy of new shooters in the Belmont? This horse could be death at 1.5 miles. I mean, he's just able to use his speed so effectively. You win the Preakness, you give yourself the opportunity to bring him back in the Belmont. Yeah. Asmussen campaigned Curlin through all 3 legs of the Triple Crown, still found a way to win the Breeders' Cup Classic. So I'm not comparing Epicenter to Curlin at this point, but I think he'll be in Baltimore.
The negative, if you want to make the negative about Epicenter, it's another one of the phrases that would be on the bingo card for this show. About I want to focus on the trips, but the trip in the slow race. I mean, it's not a fast Derby, and you'll see that with pace meltdowns for sure. But that's my only. Our friend Pat tweeted, and it's an interesting question and worthy of discussion. Best losing performance in the Derby since when? But I think that's where you get in trouble, because for guys like us looking at it through the lens of the clock. In my own reckoning of the race, so the Timeform US algorithm upgraded Epicenter from a 118 final to a 120 performance figure based on where he attacked the pace. I feel like that's a little unkind. Like, in my ranking him in ability terms, I want to give him more extra credit from that. But even as much extra credit as I want to give him, is going to put him around, like, I don't know, a 103 buyer. We've certainly seen better losing performances than that. You don't have to go back too far, I would say, to get to that point. But I mean, it's an interesting question. How much from your looking at the final time, do you agree with the figure? I think it came back a 101 on the Beyer scale. I've seen other figure makers have it a little bit lower, including Timeform US. Do you feel like that's the right number-ish for the Derby? And does it temper the enthusiasm at all about Epicenter for you?
I mean, it's race run. It's such an extreme pace. It's very hard to take a final time figure and let it fully capture what went on. You know, I think I've been fiddling around with my replay. That's why you see me looking up at the TV. But there is a point in time. They're about halfway down the backstretch, and where I have paused my video, where Summer is Tomorrow's inside of Crown Pride. Messier's right behind. On the outside of him is Zozos. Then there's 2 lengths to Taiba. On the outside of him is Cyberknife. Epicenter's on the rail about 4 lengths off the lead. Charge It's on the outside. That is a group of 8 horses. 7 of them finished 11th or worse. 1 didn't, right? Go back a length and a half and you have Smile Happy. He actually finished pretty well. He actually ran very well, and probably has a derby of some sort around the country with his name on it. Then inside of him, you have Zandon, who, of course, finished 3rd. Outside of him, you have Pioneer of Medina, who finished, I think, 19th. You have White Abario on the outside. The point being, this pace was brutal. It was impossible for anybody to stay with it. So, final time figure, yeah, it's tough to adjust for that. I thought that, and I mean, Craig's stuff, I think, is precise. I think it also depends on the intervals of the race when the horses are running. You know, were you really pushing it? Were you really making an aggressive move into the pace where the pace was still strong, or were they starting to decelerate at that point in time? I felt like between Epicenter and Zandon, Epicenter moved maybe at some of the wrong times, through no fault of his own or his riders, but it was just that he needed to move at that point, and that was when they were all moving.
Yeah.
So in front of him and to get that position. So yeah, I think the no trips and slow races applies to anybody who was coming from off the pace that may have encountered some kind of traffic. At that point, I don't care. If there's going to be discussion about Mo Donegal before the Belmont, and he was wide and he was this and that. I'm not making excuses for horses that got that set up. No, sir.
I'm also happy to report that Adelphi Racing Club are back in the fold. This is a unique racing partnership that provides the best of both worlds. Individual ownership where you're having a real stake, plus the partnership experience, lots of interactive content on the Adelphi horses. They do a great job, and they've still got limited shares left in a couple of runners getting ready to debut, including this New York bred by Laban, Gem Mint Tin, and also the Taproot colt we've been talking about for a while, whose name is Magistrate. We've got Magistrate going to be heading to Christophe Lemaire, and Gem Mint 10 is going to be heading to Ray Handel, who we've had on the airwaves a bunch of times. Join the club. Lots of ways to get in touch. AdelphiRacing.com. You can hit up Matt at AdelphiRacing.com. Follow on social at Adelphi_Racing, Twitter at Adelphi Club. Going to be hearing a lot more, and very happy. I'm not just somebody who reads ads for Adelphi Racing. I'm also a client. That's interesting. No, I think you make some great points. And I would say of the two scenarios, I mean, the Epicenter move, it's interesting. Depending on which type of chart you look at, it can look on the Timeform US chart. It actually, to me, it just illustrates it so well, where you see in the third call in that chart line, he's made the lead, and you see coded red, of course, throughout. He was moving into a very fast part of that race, whereas those closers coming later, we're getting a much more optimal setup. And I agree. I don't blame Rosario for that at all. A couple other things about, and I do feel like, I know it's been covered elsewhere, but I do want to talk about the ride and the winner too. That would be a host fail to not get that one in there. But I did have a reaction. So you were smarter than me. You knew it was the 21 coming up. My first glance, like watching live in the gray light of Churchill, I saw the 2 first. And for a second, I thought it was Happy Jack in the lane. I thought White Saddle Towel too. I just for half a second, which I actually would have been, no less surprised. Everything else I've said about chaos and this and that would have completely applied to Happy Jack. I was talking to Doug O'Neill. We did the bottle signing for the TRF over at Louisville Stoneware Company, and he in his own assessment of the horse described him as a 100-to-1 shot. So there you go. But I then had as I was steaming, I was like, wait a second, the best closer wins with an inside trip, and you're telling me it's not Mo Donegal? Like, how did that happen? And then I was wondering, I was concocting a theory of, was it a young, hungry jock willing to make a move inside where a more experienced rider, didn't want to deal with all that, didn't want to deal with all the attendant difficulty of trying to weave the way inside. But as I watched the replay, I cannot fault Irad really on Mo Donegal. There was at the time when he could have theoretically followed Rich Strike, it was just kind of a wall. I thought, and you tell me what you think, Nick, but I thought there was just a wall in front of him, and I feel like he was all in with no outs and had to kind of swing and do what he did at this point. It just didn't work out for him, and ground lost people are going to upgrade that horse immensely. And I'm not saying he can't win a big race, but to me, Epicenter is so by far the horse you want to take out of it with the tactical speed, as opposed to Mo Donegal, who's always going to need, I think he is always going to need that kind of setup help. What did you think of, let's start with Mo Donegal, since that's where I am, just in terms of Irad. Did he make any mistakes there?
No, the point in time that I was referencing a moment ago where I paused my replay, that's when Sonny Leon decided with Rich Strike, okay, I'm going to shove and get into this. And at that point, Irad was a little outmoved, and he had to wait, and he who hesitates waits. So he ended up making a wide move then as Barber Road went by him. The problem that you run into is that when you're going to cover that much ground in a race like this at Churchill, they really have to come back to you. And I don't think Epicenter and Zandon came back to them. I think the closers that had gotten that great setup just one of them went and got them. They were decelerating, of course. It's a dirt race, so everybody's decelerating in the final quarter mile. And I think that losing that extra ground probably hurt. The charge against Mo Donegal at this point is that, Mo Donegal won a Remsen that was a rodeo down the stretch. And then he won the Wood Memorial with an absolutely perfect trip up the rail where he was all out to catch a third-time starter. So, he sort of is what he is, right? He's some excellent fit for the Belmont. Maybe if he can get the kind of trip that he did in the Remsen, but not the kind of trip that he did in the Kentucky Derby. You don't win the Belmont from back where he did. And I know there was egg on my face after Sir Winston won in 2019. You want to talk about a phenomenal Joel Rosario ride. There's another one. But that's a different topic. So
the way the track was playing did not hurt that horse one bit.
Get him to the rail the whole way around. There are dead last closers. Incredible.
Yeah.
So, it was the performance by Mo Donegal. If you bet Mo Donegal and somebody told you ahead of time they're going to go 45-1, you would have gotten very, very excited. So it kind of felt his effort kind of feels like much ado about nothing in a way. So I would say that, he probably looms a contender. I think Pletcher basically said straight to Belmont. Todd doesn't run horses in the Preakness. So, he'll be single digits, I would imagine, depending on what happens over the next few weeks.
Yeah, he's going to need some help, I think. Going longer, he should be closer. I'm not giving up on him, but clearly Epicenter, the horse that is, getting the antenna up and the sensors.
One other thing I'll say about Mo Donegal, Pete, and I tweeted this after the Wood Memorial, and I made a comment about how great the ride was. And it was in large part because of Joel Rosario's ride and how good he was at saving ground. The more important thing, this didn't apply so much on Saturday, but the biggest thing for me was that Mo Donegal relaxed and he was very handy and he was inside as opposed to being outside in every race he had run with Irad. And I don't know if Joel was a little bit more interested in getting him some schooling or, trying something that it was almost like, when you win a race like he did in the Wood Memorial, you kind of have to cheat a little, right? And I mean that in the purest sense. But you've got to save ground. You've got to go inside. You've got to split. You've got to do those things. And it's sort of a parallel to the Derby itself. You can't win the Derby from 17th or 18th without saving ground at some point. You've got to get that split. You've got to get that path. You think about some of the incredible off the pace Derby rides over the years, and Giacomo, Mike Smith rolled Yahtzee every time he made a move, right? It opened up and he got through. And even Orb accelerated so fast while he was wide that I think he got a split a little bit earlier in the race. Fuseiji Pegasus came up the rail at one point before angling out. You have to get bold. And Sonny Leon was bold.
Yeah, it was incredible. And I mean, it does make a point that a lot of us make about how the talent in jocks rooms is not limited to the top rooms in the country that we think of. I mean, nobody could have done better on him. And I mean, I think you just nailed it. There is something bold about that, especially that initial move that he makes, and fortune favors the bold. How impressed were you with this ride all in all? We should bring it back to the winner in our last couple minutes here.
Almost in awe of how good it was. The instincts coming past the quarter pole to understand that, okay, they're probably going to fan out in front of me because I'm looking at a lot of tired flanks. And so he held his position and didn't allow his horse to come off the inside even more and then potentially get stuck in traffic. One of the interesting things about derbies, and I remember one of the biggest influences that I've had in terms of helping me understand a lot about race flow, I was talking to about the Derby in 2010. And so the point was made to me about Icebox that when Icebox briefly got held up at the quarter pole and it looked like he steadied an altered course, it actually was a good thing. Because when a race is collapsing, you can't necessarily get to where you're going to as fast. But it collapses generally in stages. It's not like all of them stop and everybody from off the pace runs by and then starts battling. So you want to be able to produce the last run in a pace collapsed race. And that's exactly what Rich Strike did. And so everybody, and I love the general public and stuff that are talking about the comeback and the rally and all that stuff, and the drone shot's great. And so what it illustrated was that when the last run needed to be produced, Rich Strike had saved the most ground, which meant that he had the most energy. He also was in a more forward position than the other closers. I mean, if you're looking at this shot inside the 16 pole, the closers at this point are he, Tawny Port, Simplification, Mo Donegal, and Barber Road. Barber Road and Mo Donegal went around Central Avenue on the turn. And Simplification was just not coming with the same gusto. He was a little closer to the pace than they had been. So what made the difference? The ride. The ride that Sonny Leon gave Rich Strike 110% made the difference. The saving ground, the splits when he got them, and he did get into some traffic. Mo Donegal's run was never stopped. He was always able to produce it. He just didn't have the same finishing kick. Whereas Rich Strike did wait, and they went inside, before ending up kind of altering course a little bit mid-stretch. You see him sort of barreling into the horse that's tiring in front of him, and he's definitely maneuvered to the outside of that one and just finished it up. Yeah, I will admit I knew very little about Sonny Leon before, but I'm a fan. and I think to your point, one other thing to your point is that I agree. The talent in jocks room is there is hardly a disparity. The only difference is the really good and the really bad. The really bad riders make themselves known, and the really good ones do too. But everybody else is generally especially in a race like this, they're comparable in ability. These are the best horses of that generation. It's most of the best trainers, and in almost all cases, the best riders.
I told you I was going to let you out of here now. Basically.
Yeah, we're on a roll.
Let's go though a little bit more, if you would, because we need to talk a little bit more about how we evaluate Zandon from here. And I wouldn't mind. We've talked about Simplification in terms of the ride, but I also wouldn't mind to hear what you think about his prospects going forward.
He's a horse that I would run back in the Preakness as well, which is probably unlikely. But the only reason I say that is he gives no indication he's a Belmont horse. So you want to give this horse you want to give him one more shot to get to the head of the class in terms of the 3-year-old Eclipse. And I think the best opportunity to do that is to win one of the next two. So I think his pedigree caught up to him a little bit. I don't blame anyone whose idea it was to put him in a forward spot, because it's very hard to play for a meltdown. It's very hard to play for a collapse. And if you have a horse like that who you believe is good, you sit back there in 12th, 13th, 14th, and you say to yourself, well, you know what, they'll come back to me, when they haven't come back to you in 9 years.
Right.
Then it's a hard thing to do. So I don't blame the Connections one bit for wanting to be a little bit more forward. Flavian Pratt seems like a guy that likes to play things kind of fast and loose with the pace. He might be forward when you expect him to come from way off of it, and he might be way off of it when you think he's got a horse with tactical speed. So I think his instincts with this horse were very good, and I thought he ran very well. He hang a little bit? Yes, he hung a little bit. Epicenter also dug in a little bit, but it sort of raises the question, if he didn't get by Epicenter on Saturday, with that happening before, is he ever getting by Epicenter at this stage of the game? And I think there's a little bit of a worry about that. Yeah. But having used him and having expected a good effort, no excuse. He ran well. He looks like one of the better horses in the crop, and I'm pretty sure there's a grade one on it. The challenge now for his Connections becomes, obviously Chad Brown is going to be looking for Jack Christopher to get in the mix with big grade one staples towards the end of the year, and those two are probably going to have to knock heads at some point.
I think you make the key point about the distance, and I say that just because, not because he ran poorly, but you just nailed it. He is supposed to go by Epicenter there, and the fact that he didn't shows me that extra eighth of a mile just is probably not his friend. Look for him on the cutback, but yeah, it's going to be tricky with obviously it's different ownership groups, so it's not impossible to turn to the Preakness, but it just doesn't feel very Chad Brownie for him to do that at all. So I would be pretty stunned, though I guess he is under consideration for the race in theory anyway.
Yeah, he is apparently, according to the Preakness notes media team. But the only thing I think might be, I wonder how many of these guys that especially cook up 2 race campaigns for their horses prior to the Derby are thinking to themselves, okay, let me have in the back of my mind that, hopefully I'm going to be conditioning this horse for a return in 2 weeks to run in the next leg. So I think there could have been some consideration for that given by Chad, which would obviously help his cause.
Right. If it was the plan all along. Chad is somebody who makes plans for his horses a long way out. We'll see what happens. I would personally be pretty surprised. Simplification ran a really nice race. You could say he was with the flow, certainly with the crazy pace and moving late, but still horse that outran his odds at 35-1 and might have some valuable prizes by his name going forward. How good do you think he is?
I think he's solid. I thought he ran very well. He seems like a horse who'll be back in the Preakness. He'll need a new rider, apparently, with Jose Ortiz opting to ride early voting. But he looks like a horse who's probably, got some decent races on his name as well. Maybe not a grade one, but I thought he took his game on the road pretty well and ran the best of the 3 Florida Derby horses. That would have been a good prop bet itself, too, is who was going to run best from that prep. And it likely would have, the favorite would have probably been Charge It, who, he ran poorly, and White Abario ran poorly. And so they're both off to, look at races later in the year, whereas Simplification, I thought, ran very well and showed that he's a horse with some real talent.
Is Charge It interesting as a potential Belmont horse? I know this was not a good effort, but just based on his pedigree, the speed that he'd shown in the past, you can conjure trip excuses for him. It certainly wasn't what you would have wanted to see. It was, I suppose, predictable for a horse in just the what would it have been, the 4th career start that would have been the case. I'm not really calling him a trip horse out of that, but I could see the logic of drawing a line through it, saying this is a Pletcher horse that's dropped some pace figures that in a normal Belmont, especially in an Epicenter less Belmont, if that's what happens, it might be too early to give up on him given Pletcher's crazy record of success in the race and even having horses with seeming non-efforts from the Derby come back and run really well there. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I think it's fair. The only question at this point is Charge It really any good? That's kind of the worry. And we knew Palace Malice was at least a decent horse. Kind of felt like Tappert was okay. He had won a couple of races along the way. Charge It right now is basically a second place finish with a dreamt up tough trip from people and then a bad Derby.
I might count as one of the.
I used him. Yeah, I used him. I thought I bought the whole, he's training great and I thought, oh, maybe he's moving forward.
I just thought the not breaking and running well and looking green. I was just thinking, hey, what if he shows some of that speed
right.
that we'd seen before? So, but
No,
yeah,
I thought the same thing. I drank the Kool-Aid. Those are kind of horses I usually throw out, but I used them, and I thought I was so clever getting alive in my Oaks Derby doubles to the horses that were going to be prices, and I didn't have to worry about betting any long shots like Tawny Port and Charge It and Cyberknife and Crown Pride, and yeah.
You look back at the form of the races, I suppose we're not really surprised. And, putting aside what Secret Oath accomplished, I think that's kind of a different deal. Can't really say I'm surprised with the Arkansas Derby form not standing up.
Right.
Are you surprised at how terrible the Santa Anita Derby form looks coming out of the Kentucky Derby?
I'm not shocked. I didn't use Taiba for a nickel, so I didn't want. And the problem with Taiba was that he was a horse who had such a good trip in the Santa Anita Derby, and you knew he wasn't going to get it here because it's tough to simulate a Derby trip in a 5 or 6 horse field, especially when you've got a runaway speed horse that's getting attended to by his stablemate that you then have to run down. So Messier, you obviously can use and can find an excuse for. See, the mistake that Messier's connections to me are making is that they're thinking he ran poorly. He didn't run poorly. He ran poorly. Well, and if you believe he ran poorly because of the way the race played out. If he was my horse, 100% to Baltimore. I mean, he would become very interesting as long as he's okay physically. But he would become very interesting to me in a race that, I mean, the Preakness could go 46 flat, right? And it's a decidedly slower pace than the Derby. Yep. So yeah, that's one where I think there's a misinterpretation of how he ran based on that extreme pace scenario. So, but Taiba ran very poorly and is probably a horse that was a more situational Santa Anita Derby winner than he is some type of really marquee horse. And I don't think that's unfair to say about him. He's just a third-time starter. So, I mean, we're going to learn significantly more about him as time goes by. But at this point, it's safe to say that coming into Saturday, Taiba was massively overrated.
Yeah, and I mean, I get it. I was part of that in terms of just saying, hey, if it was just a race on a Wednesday, the horse with this kind of form and these kind of figures, you could make an argument is going to be, quite a bit shorter than the 5-1. I had even thrown out there the idea of a surprise, him being surprised in the conversation for favorite, which of course is he was for quite some time. I look at Messier's PPs right now and just forming opinions on the fly. This is the horse that looks like Palace Malice to me. I mean, setting the pace,
yep,
being in front in the pace in the hot race. Maybe I get it. Maybe, I mean, he's third off a layoff. Your Preakness idea is not crazy at all, but I mean, Belmont makes a lot of sense with this blood.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about a very long-winded pedigree. This is a horse who, you put Johnny on and you tell him you put this horse on the lead and start clicking off 24 and 3s and good luck. That's going to make him pretty tough. And, with Messier, I think the thing that's important to remember in terms of analyzing his form is that his best effort is an exaggerated performance as well, because he was loose on the lead on an inside favoring track. So, if you're trying to get everybody at their best, you have to understand what happened. I mean, the old Paul Matisse line, it's how races are run, not necessarily who won. And so, understanding a little bit more about that, you get into a scenario where you probably take a more realistic approach to exactly who he is, as opposed to just saying, oh God, well, I mean, he's a horse that can get 100+ Beyer. A lot of horses can get better Beyer figures when they're loose on the lead, especially on a surface that might be kind to inside types.
Yes, I agree that the race now 3 back, absolutely flattered by setup and track. But I'm also with you. I know the final figure doesn't tell you anything about this horse's ability. Now, this ownership group, and I won't use the nickname because I'm so sorry if Peter Parker or if Tony Stark or Peter Parker aren't involved. It ain't the Avengers, folks. But so interested in the stallion operation, Belmont, less sexy race from a stallion making point of view. I wonder if that's going to affect how they campaign this horse.
Well, that's possible. Yeah, Belmont is less sexy than the Preakness. I know little about breeding.
I think to breeders, there's like a little bit in the back of the head that 12 furlongs to some people in that business, winning at 12 furlongs is of less interest, simply because it in their mind, and I don't think this is fair, but I think there's just like a stereotype in the business that the longer distance can indicate a slower horse, which, you know, shouldn't really apply to Messier though, because you've already got a horse that was a grade 1 winner at 2. So just putting a grade 1 up at 3 like that it probably isn't an anti thing for Messier, but I do worry that it like sometimes sticks in the back of people's heads in that context.
Yeah, you know, and I think that's quite possible. I think that ownership group is probably also realizing that having 3 horses that get marquee stud deals in one crop was probably the exception rather than the rule. It like they did in their first go round, and so it definitely led to a significant amount of copycatting from people of trying to put together groups. And you know, I think finding good 2-year-olds, especially in yearling sales that go on to blossom as 3-year-olds, is really hard. Yeah. And they happen to use a trainer who's done a remarkably good job of it over the years. So I could see it. You know, one thing I don't want to be too cheeky about this, because I find it that the man is in an incredibly tough position. But since Taiba won the Santa Anita Derby, the horses that went from Bob Baffert to Tim Yakteen, they've not run well.
Right.
McLaren Vale the other day in an allowance race ran very poorly. Doppelganger ran very poorly in the Pat Day Mile. Messier, I don't want to say he ran very poorly. He didn't really run the race that we expected, and he did finish 15th. So somebody would say, well, how well could he have run? But it's something to think about. Yeah. Because, you know, none of us could quantify what it meant that these horses were going to Yakteen, or they weren't with Baffert anymore, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, it's not insignificant at this point.
No, and that's something Mike Maloney and I have talked about. I don't think it actually made it into the book, but he actually made the point back then when the trend that happens early, when horses get switched to a new barn en masse like that very often you'll find signal in what happens with the first of them. Now, this picture got clouded because of how well Taiba and Messier ran in the Santa Anita Derby, but now that race is looking like questionable form, I think it's a valid concern. As for Taiba, I did have the back of this was a whole 2 thoughts in my mind. Horse 2, on one hand, respecting the brilliance and what the speed figures were telling me. On the other hand, you know, sometimes the owner picked the spot. If it doesn't catch up with them on the day, it catches up with them on the next day. You know, there's a reason why all the horsemen associated with the beast were questioning the idea of running in the Santa Anita Derby. Now, I don't know if that had to do with a physical concern or a mental concern, but I mean, I can't say that it's any surprise at all to see him. I mean, I'm just going to say it. I mean, he just bombed out. I mean, he just looked terrible. Like, you can conjure an excuse for Messier because of the extreme pace situation. I mean, Taiba just didn't look ready for his close-up, right?
Right. Yeah, I was actually just looking at his PP line. He finished 12th and was really never within 3 lengths. So it was a pretty poor performance. Might not be a popular opinion. He'd be a cutback for me if I was his connections. I'd be looking at the Woody Stevens, and you know, you then can use that as a springboard to getting back into the graded stake mix down the line. He'd be a horse that maybe I'd look at the Dwyer en route to going long again. But I think that the Santa Anita Derby win was probably more of the exception to the rule for him as well.
We didn't really land on what we think is next for Simplification, did we? I mean,
he is going to the Preakness as far as what I've read.
Okay, he is going to go. Okay, you did say that. That's right. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see how he does sharp back in that spot. Any others that you want to touch on before we wrap things up? Barber Road, a horse who, you know, I question the form of the Arkansas Derby. Somebody could say, well, you know what, he didn't run too badly, and he didn't run too badly. But I think the coolest thing about him is he's just a real trier, and I feel like he might need some class relief. But this is another horse that I look at and I see some other derbies with far-flung states perhaps attached to, because he's just a really cool horse and a trier, and the kind of horse that you'd love to own, and the kind of horse that, as a racing fan, if you don't respect, I can't really help you. You know what I mean? He gives it his all.
Yeah, you kind of feel like maybe he's the type that if he stays decent enough and the crop sort of switches around in terms of who's at the top, you know, we think about all those years like 16, 17, 18 Justify went by the wayside, but in 16 and 17, the best horses in the crop, I mean, it completely flipped from this time until the end of the year, mainly because Bob Baffert had something in the barn that he was about to unleash. Right. So, you know, you wonder if maybe Barber Road is the type that can just stick around, and maybe there's something with his name on it for that reason alone. So, he's always going to give up a lot with his style. So he will seduce some in the Belmont, and they'll say, oh, he's just going to run all day. And guess what? They all get the 12 furlongs. Some faster than others. So cool horse. I mean, I'll always root for Raylu, and I hope he gets an opportunity to win a big race. But he generally, in dirt racing, he gives up a lot with that deep closing style. And the other thing is, I don't exactly. This is the second race in a row where he's gotten a pretty strong pace to run into, and he's gotten a little wobbly late. So I don't know if maybe he wants to go a little bit shorter. So what you're alluding to, some of those mile and an eighth races, thinking like Ohio Derby, West Virginia Derby, things like that, Indiana Derby, those are probably a little bit more his speed.
Yeah, and if they get if there's pace in them, I could see him
Right.
coming rolling down. Christophe Lemaire, widely regarded as one of the best jockeys in the world. on his resume for any future Hall of Fames he might get inducted into, I don't think they're going to include the Crown Pride ride. I don't know why he was that close there. This was a horse for me whose weapon, I'm not saying he was a slow horse, but for me, his weapon was stamina. What was he doing that close to the pace?
Good question. And I was actually going to ask you if you thought that maybe it had to do with him having been so aggressively trained that he was a little keyed up as well. So, I wonder if maybe there was not so much that Christophe Lemaire could have done. There's a moment out of the gate where John Velasquez asks Messier, Mikel Barcelona moves his hands ever so slightly on Summer is Tomorrow. Lemaire never moves on Crown Pride. He sort of lets Crown Pride run up there. And I think he just ended up being a very headstrong, very willing colt at that point. And, the risk that you run, the difference between most American riders and a lot of international riders is that most of our guys would have just put him in a hammerlock and tried to put him to sleep towards the back of the, towards the middle of the pack. Whereas Lemaire said, let me set up outside, and probably realized when they straightened away in the backstretch, well, this isn't going to work.
Yeah, you might be right. I might be being unkind. And I could also see myself saying, well, you got to use their speed from that spot, especially with the way the derbies have been played. I was just surprised. I love that he broke well, but I would have thought that just galloping along. I mean, I think he actually, given what my opinion of the horse going in is, he actually ran really well to hang around with that much speed for that long. Another horse that, just given the stamina I expect him to have from his training, would be a little bit interesting if they decide to come back in the Belmont. What are you hearing? Anything? Are they sending him back home? Is he going to hang around?
He's going back to Japan. Okay. So I'm guessing. I mean, he could come back to the Belmont, right? It didn't. When Lonnie ran in the Belmont, didn't he run in all three? I think
he ran in all three.
Yeah. I would imagine there'll be a push on the part of the NYRA racing office to get him back for the Belmont. So he would seem to make a lot of sense in there. And, he took the worst of it pace-wise as well. And, hell, he and Messier were still slugging it out at the 3/16 pole. So, that was as Rich Strike was weaving his way through traffic like an aggressive shopper at 5 p.m. at the Price Club. So
I was going to go with the gallop racer analogy. I like.
There you go. Yeah.
We're going to give that one to you.
No, so I agree. It was that was a little surprising as far as the way things kind of shook out. There was something else I was going to say about one of the also rans, but I can't remember. Again, I thought Smile Happy's race was better than it looked on paper. And I think there's probably a good, a nice race for him out there too. He feels like a horse that ultimately probably wants to go a little bit shorter also. We've really talked about everybody that finished in the top 10. Oh, I was going to say the one thing that I was right about pace-wise, and granted, I mean, Maloney and I both said we thought it had a very high potential for a meltdown, was they just ran Classic Causeway for the hell of it. He didn't.
They wanted the walkover? Is that what you're suggesting?
That's it. That's it. That was about getting a suite. And you know what? I don't blame him. I probably would have done the same thing. And I think Lynch told Julian, you keep that horse in mid-pack the entire way, and you don't mess him up because I need to win the Woody Stevens with him. Because, I mean, it's exactly how he was ridden, right? I mean, he was never asked out of the gate. This horse generally flies out of the starting gate. He's got a ton of early speed, and he just basically got cuddled around there so that he could live to fight another day. So
Those suites were nice. I was hanging out down by those winter circle suites. And
they look amazing. So I don't blame them, it would take, there's a reason why. So Seth Klarman has skipped the Kentucky Derby with 2 horses in the last 5 years. One of the reasons was because in one of them he had another horse, but he is somebody who is the atypical owner, right? He is going to campaign his horses so that they can be at their best, according to his trainer, in certain races. And in their opinion, early voting's best opportunity was to get a win in the Triple Crown was in the Preakness, where he will face a battered group of horses coming back on short rest, or other new shooters that really don't look like much, to be perfectly honest. He's not most owners. Right. He's not, he will pass the Derby with a horse that has the requisite amount of points. Most owners won't. And I get it. I get it. I think Classic Causeway's 2 owners are very elderly. And so this was an opportunity for them to get in the Derby. Good on him.
He's going to have filthy looking form heading into the Woody Stevens. I mean, you got, I'm almost, we'll see how it shakes out. But based on what you're saying now, I'm already thinking of him as a cheeky include off of 2 11th place finishes. But, at least one of which has an excuse. The Derby cuddled along. What a great phrase to describe what was going on there. That's potential interesting one. One other point about Klarman that I think factors into it, and you might know better than me, but I think there's Baltimore connections there too, right? So the Preakness might mean a little bit more to him than the average owner as well.
Yeah, he's from Baltimore, and so then 2017 that came up that he went to Pimlico as a kid, and so I think there's a lot to be included about that as well. So and just prudent. I mean, they're good about he's a guy that doesn't spend a ton of money on his horses, and obviously has a lot of money, but tries to campaign them so that they can be most effective in the biggest spots.
We are going to have a ton more about the Preakness. I think we'll try to get an early look at the Preakness, maybe even midweek this week. If we can get JK back from the Bahamas, maybe I'll harass him for that one, Nick, because you've given us so much today, and I don't think there's too much meat left on the bone as far as this race goes. Though, you can't congratulate the connections enough. It's one of those things where, yes, in the immediate aftermath, I resented the horse because he made me look like a dummy. But, these things happen. That's just part of racing. And very curious to see what happens from here. Hopefully he takes a lot of money in the Preakness. We didn't say this part out loud, but we'll end on this note. A horse I know I'm very much looking to take on wherever he appears next, presumably the Preakness. Is that you as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're going to, this horse goes off 5 or 6 to 1. He's a takeout killer.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No doubt about it. I mean, hats off to the connections and the rider and Eric Reed, who hadn't won a graded stake race in, I can't even tell you. I was actually thinking about this. I'm very ill mentally, and I was thinking about this last night. And so Eric Reed trained a horse named Satan's Quick Chick that won the Raven Run in 2010, and I was right. That was his last graded stake winner.
Wow, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, came up the rail to win the Raven Run at like 18 or 20 to 1, and I was probably like one stage above broke because I was 25 years old or something, and so I had bet Satan's Quick Chick, and 2 years later I told Leandro Goncalves when I met him at Louisiana Downs when he won the Super Derby on Bourbon Courage. I said, "Man, you made me money when you came up the rail and you won that Raven Run." And he's like, "They never saw me. They never saw me coming up the inside." And so it was great. It was a fun moment. But that was Eric Reed's only other graded stake winner.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Speaking of sneaking up the inside, I can only imagine the riders.
You got that
I can
right.
only imagine Rosario's reaction.
I mean, collectively, the other 13 are going to get together and they're going to say, "Look, this SOB might beat us again, but he sure as hell ain't going to save ground the whole way around." Right?
It's going to be a fun couple of weeks. Looking forward to it. We'll have it all covered for you here on the network. Get more. We have our free newsletter in the moneypodcast.com/email. And then, of course, we're keeping the plus thing rolling. Boy, we got some great comments and some happy customers. One guy, Nick, very unhappy. He sent me a personal email after the result of the Derby, and it said, he was unsubscribing and he said goodbye jerks, only he didn't say jerks. Anyway, it amused me to no end.
Oh, did he use an anatomical part that
He did in fact.
Okay, good.
He did,
Well,
in fact. So yeah, one
you know
unfairness
who I think who he was referring to was my two guests, Marshall Graham and Mike Maloney, who are probably like 1 and 1A of nice guys in racing, right? Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, you know, 499 satisfied customers, and then the one guy. Too funny. All right, thank you, my friend. Really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely.
And we will be back at it very soon. Thanks. We've talked about him a few times in the show, but thanks to 10 Strike Racing. Thanks to Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation. Most of all, though, I want to thank all of you, the listeners, for making these shows so much fun to do, especially all of you plus people out there. This show's been a production of In the Money Media. Our business manager is Drew Coatney. Our chief creative officer is Jonathan Kinchin. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatel. May you win all your photos.